This tutorial covers how you model a palm tree. Now this is based on a tutorial from Sara Farr, full-time faculty at ACC. If you're in one of my classes, you'll have a link to her written notes on how to go through and build this. So here I have an example of the palm tree that we're going to make. If I orbit around, you can take a look and see it. All right, there's a palm tree. There's a slight variation on the tree over here. Now this is going to be a little bit different from some of my other tutorials in that I'm not going to go through completely step by step on how to make it. So I'm going to go over here to Photoshop. The first thing you need to do is you need to create textures. Here I have my palm tree underscore O for opacity. This is what masks out the leaves, but also leaves the bark fully opaque. And over here next to it, I have my palm tree underscore BC for base color. And you can see that this is what is called an atlas texture. You have all the different elements to make up the tree are all packed into one texture. I have two different palm fronds, and I have the bark over here on the side. What I've done over here in my layers menu, you can see that I've gone in and I put everything into groups. I can hide each section, the first frond, the second frond, and the bark. If I expand the group, you can see that here's my bark, and then you can see the frond and the other frond. Now in order to make a group, all you need to do is you can select anything. Like if I select all three of these groups and click on the little group button down here, that puts them all into one group, and I could double click to rename it. If I want to move things out, I simply click and drag and move them out. And so now those are out of their little groups. So for how to go through and to mask something out like this, I would recommend that you go back and watch my foliage tutorial that I did, because it shows how you can go through and take an image and mask it out. What I've done here is I've gone through and I've masked out this palm frond, and I have it overlaid over this green. All right. I've done the same thing with this frond over here as well. What I did to find these images was I actually went and I looked them up on the internet in this case, and I found myself a nice two palm fronds. Then I went and isolated, and I found a nice bark texture. Now the bark has been adjusted slightly in that I took one tiling bark and I adjusted it so that I'm actually using it. It's stacked 2 times on top of itself, and I did squash it a little bit, right? And I've broken it up into these different quadrants. So now once I had my base color, I went in and I made my opacity. You could see here, when I come out over here, you could see that here's I made the black and white for my different areas, and the bark itself is fully opaque and white. All right, and so this is used for the transparency. All right. So now let's go over to 3ds Max. In Max, I have a material that I created. And so if you look, I have a multi-sub-object material, and that actually has an A bark texture and a B branches. And so if you look at the bark, all I'm plugging into, if I look here in Maps, you see that it's only using the base color. All right, I plug that in there, and then I have a separate material, which is the branches, and this one actually makes use of both the base color as well as the opacity. I've also gone in and flagged. I can go in and click and flag it to be two-sided if I wanted, right, in order to get that to show up. Now the reason for separating it, even though the texture, as you can see, is used in both of them, the reason for separating it is it's better for rendering purposes. If you have something that's totally opaque, then you should have that in its own material, right? And so that's why it's has its own bark material, even though it's utilizing the same texture. And so then this entire material is what's assigned to our objects. All right, so here I have a cylinder, and I just made a basic cylinder with a radius of 6, height of 300. It has a lot of height segments. I set that to 18, and I reduced the number of sides to 8. Right. think in this example tree, this is set to, yep, that's 8 sides as well. And then on top of that, I put a little taper on it. And so the taper goes through and actually kind of slightly deforms it a little bit, gives it a little bit of a sweep coming in, makes it look a little bit more natural. All right. From here, we would go in and assign that material. If I right-click, assign material to selection, I could take this and convert it to edit poly, and I can grab that and just assign it ID 1, because that's going to be the bark. Now when I put on my unwrap UVW and open up the UV editor, I'm going to come up here, first thing, options, preferences. I'm going to turn off selection preview and say OK. And now if I come up here, I can click my palm tree base color. There it is. There's some areas over here, sometimes when you use the default UVs for a cylinder, it breaks them on the edge. I like to go through in a vertex mode, select them, and hit weld selected. There we go. And then I'll take everything I have, like all these polygons, just move them over here. All right. I just want to make sure that these verts line up on the edge. And then I'm just going to go through, select these polygons here, break those, and then move them over. I'm going to deselect, and I'm going to break those, and I'm going to move those over. I'm going to deselect, break those, and move those over. Now one thing you'll notice, if I region select, I'm going to go ahead and deselect everything here in this sort of center area. And I'm just going to do a quick peel. Yeah, that is the caps on the cylinder. That's what was causing those weird shapes. So I'm just going to kind of set those over down here for now. Okay. So now I can come in, and if I go into vertex mode, I can select all these and do a vertical align and make sure those are all set to 1. I can vertical align all these. If I just zoom in, I want to make sure they're picking up that pixel there. There we go. And then I can vertical align here. That's already at 1, and these are at 0. I don't need to worry about vertical align them. And so now if we look, we see that it looks like it's all getting stretched. So let's just right click and convert that to poly. We're going to bake that in and make that permanent. So easy way to adjust this is I've selected my model. I'm going to hit UVW X form, and UVW X form allows you to go in and do things like tell things to tile. So I can enter value of 2, and now my bark is tiling 2 times, and that's vertically. If I was to do it here, you'd see the leaf show up, but we don't want that. So I'll set that back to 1. And I could do, I think if I tile it 4 times, I think that looks right. Let's compare that with my tree over here. Might do it 1 more. Yeah, I'll just do it 4. There we go. So that's looking pretty good, I think. So, yeah. I think I might have gotten a little bit aggressive with how much it tiles. Let's put an unwrap on this tree to double check it and do Open UV Editor. Yeah, it looks like I actually used 4 sides, so I unwrapped it by half. So I can come back in here and just remove that and do unwrap UVW again, open the UV Editor, and let's just grab this edge, and then over here I'm going to hit stitch, and then I'm going to come around this guy and grab this edge, and I'm going to hit stitch on that one. There we go. And so now if we hit element, alright, that whole guy's together, and this guy's together, and so I just kind of want to split it. So let's go ahead and we'll just get him reattached too. Go to edge. Come on, oops, accidentally got out of edge mode. I'm going to grab this edge and hit stitch, go back into weld, grab all the verts and hit weld again, weld selected. And now I just want to split this in half. That was my mistake. So I'm going to grab 4 because it's 8 sides. I'm going to break that and move it, oops, move it over. I'm going to come up here to restrict horizontal and then slide that over. And then I can grab the whole thing. And I can just grab my gizmo. And let's just make sure this is set back to regular. Come up and select my palm tree. And if I go back to free transform, I can come over here and zoom in and just make sure these guys kind of line up there. Grab this corner and move him. All right, there we go. That's going to actually look a lot better. So I can, yeah, if I convert that at poly, now I can go in, and if I just put, I hit F4 to hide my edged faces. If I put UVW X form on, I can now tile this to, maybe I'll tile it 3 times. I think that looks good. All right, and so now we have our trunk, and so we could call this palm tree trunk. There we go. And we can convert that to an edit poly. All right, gets a little tight up at the top, but that's okay. All right, so now let's do unwrap UVW. Open UV editor, just double check that, make sure that's all set right. Yep, okay, perfect. Convert that to edit poly. Okay, so next what we want to do is we want to set up the leaves. So for the leaves, I made a plane here. It's 100 units by 30. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to go back into my material editor, and now I'm going to assign this full material, assign the whole multi-sub object to it. I'm going to convert this to an edit poly, go into element, select it, and I'm going to assign this ID2 so it's got the palm frond. I'm going to right click and say hide unselected. And what I'm going to do is go into unwrap UVW, open the UV editor, and I'm going to go ahead again, options, preference. I'm going to turn off my selection preview, and I'm going to select my palm tree texture. And I'm just going to come in here and grab everything and use the freeform to go in and adjust it. And I just want to kind of get the base over here, come over here on the side. There we go. And now I got my palm all set. I right click and convert that at poly. And what I can do with this is if I go into element, I'm going to grab the whole thing and slide it down so that its origin of the palm is right over here at the edge, right? So now it'll be easy to rotate and place it. Okay, and I can clone this. I can call this branch A, and if I clone this as a copy, I'm going to call this branch B. This one I'm just going to move over to the side here so we can visually easily see it there. We'll change the colors so it's easier to see the wireframes. And here for B, I'm going to do the same thing. Oops, I accidentally hit UVW map. I'm going to do an unwrap UVW, open UV editor, select my texture, and again, same thing. I'm just going to move this freeform over here. I'm going to come down at the side. There we go. Right click, convert to edit poly. Now this one's a little bit thinner, so maybe I'll just take this and real quick just kind of scale it in a little bit. Okay, now last thing, just want to grab the sides on these guys. And we're just going to raise them up a little bit. And I'm actually going to grab these edges. Let's double check our other palm tree. Yeah, these other palm trees only have one edge right in the middle. So I'm going to grab this edge here and find my loops. I've actually floated my loop menu out to the side here. But if you look, it should be right there. I'm going to do remove loop. So let's grab those edges and do loops, remove loop. There we go. Now this guy's ready to go. I may want to take that real quick, open the UV editor, view my texture. I may want to grab that vertex, grab these vertices, and just move them more so that they line up. The center of them actually lines up. Right? So that's cool. Now this kind of center area kind of lines up with where the frond is. So I'm just right click, convert to edit poly. I'm going to do the same thing with this guy. I'm going to go into edge. I'm going to grab these edges here and do loops, remove loop, and then grab the side edges and just raise those up. There we go. So now I have my palm fronds, and what I can do at this point is I'm going to start placing them, right? And the way this is constructed, right, you have actually 1, 2, 3, 4 rows. And so if I was to take them off and show you, there's actually 3 rows. So you have one row that hangs very low, one that comes out slightly, and then one that's really doing this almost kind of C effect. All right, and so you kind of want to get those set up for your 3 objects, and then you're going to place them on your model. And so if I take this, I'm going to go ahead and grab a bend modifier, and I'm going to apply that to it. We just need to change our axis on it. Oops, let's stay it on Y, but then we just rotate this guy. There we go. This needs to be -90. There we go. Okay. So then to get our main one that droops very low, we're going to kind of bend him down, and you can kind of see him there, sort of hanging down. And then we'll make a clone of this, and we're going to call it copy, and we'll reduce that so he's kind of coming out slightly. And then we're going to make one more, so clone it again as a copy. And then this one is a little bit more interesting. For him, what we're going to do is grab this. I might be able to just grab the center and adjust it that way. Yeah. So we want to bend him more. I'm just going to grab this gizmo and adjust its, there we go. That's looking pretty good. I'm just going to right click and convert that to edit poly. And then in element, I'm going to grab it, and from the side here, I'm going to kind of move this over and sort of position that. There we go. Some of these, you may want to go in and grab some of these edges and use your loops flow connect to kind of round them out just a little bit more. Just kind of maybe this one at the top. All right. So once you've done that, you'll do the same thing with this palm frond here, and then you're just going to take those and clone them and position them around your tree, right? And so if I take all these guys, I'm going to grab everything and move it over to the side, and then I'm just going to grab these, and I'm going to move them over to sit at 0. There we go. I could probably take all of them, and if I set my axis so it's pivot based, I can do tools, array, and let's turn on preview here and set these up to be instances. You could see that you could go through. Now this is going to be too many if you leave it at the default to 10. I may set this to like 6 and then rotate those around, right? Like if I take those all the way, that's, right, if we orbit around, look, that's probably not enough. So let's set it to 7 and then go back. There we go. All right. So what is that? Takes us up to 53 degrees. And what I'm doing is I'm rotating to get them evenly spaced. Oops. Anytime you right click, preview turns off. So I'll take that down to 6. There we go. So this gives me a nice arrangement for all of these fronds. Now I could grab this group, raise them up slightly. Right, these guys kind of sit. Actually, I'll leave those guys where they are. All right, so then you would do the same thing with this palm, but you're just going to take all those and just offset them slightly. And that's going to kind of give you that sort of palm tree structure, right? Because then once you're all finished, you take all of these and you're going to raise them up. Oops, missed one. Take all that, raise them up. I'm going to grab this base and center it, and then I can sort of position this grouping up here at the top of my tree. All right. So right now it looks pretty bad because it's just one. But once you get a second one in there that kind of has a little bit more variety, it starts to look better. And maybe you'll see like, hey, I don't think this guy is, bent enough. I think we need to bend him more. So you could always come in and then, kind of adjust them, because those are instances, and you do have the ability then to go in and adjust those so that they bend even more. All right. And you could adjust all of their heights, how they sit, right? Because currently all these are sitting at the same height. Zoom out, select all of them, and then we kind of space them out on the tree a little bit, and that'll help. All right. So let's go here to the front, and if I grab everything, deselect the trunk, I can lower these down, and so you can see there's my 3 main groupings that I have. Oops. There we go. All right. So keep missing this guy when I select him. All right. But once we get those additional ones over on the side dropped in place, that'll end up looking really good. And then once you finish arranging all of your fronds, you make a box, zero that out, convert it to edit poly, and you'll attach all the pieces together so that your tree becomes one object. What you see over here on the side is just if you were to clone your trunk, I'll set this to palm tree trunk B and make it a copy. In this case, this is just using something like a freeform deformation 4x4x4. So if I zoom out, if we want to, let's make sure we go into the control points. If you want to grab the trunk, move it over to the side, then you can take these other control points and rotate them. And what that does is that allows you to get a little bit more creative with the shape of your palm tree, right? If you want to make it a little bit more interesting. As long as you take once you get all your palm fronds in place, once they're all kind of grouped together, it makes it easier to go through and kind of position them. I think I made these all a little bit too big. There we go. Maybe shrink them down. Yeah, there we go. Okay. Yeah. So just get that other guy in there. All right. So once you go through and you build your palm tree, then you'll export it out and bring it into Unreal. And I'll do another tutorial showing how you set up the material inside of Unreal. Here's my Unreal scene. You can see that I've already imported my palm tree, right? Here's my meshes. Here are my textures. I did save my Photoshop files off to be PNG files and brought them in. Now the bark material itself is very simple. If I double click to open that up, you'll see I plugged my base color. It just goes into base color. I added a constant, that's right click, constant 1. I created one of those for metallic, and I created another one for roughness, and I set that to 1 so that the bark itself is very flat and basic. Now, along with that, I have also made a material for my fronds. Now, this one is a little bit different. When you make this material, you're going to select the material itself and come over to the side. Material domain remains surface. The blend mode is going to be masked. And then you're going to change the shading model. And you can see this is set to two-sided foliage. I've also checked two-sided right here. Now, what you do with that is a lot of these are the same. I have a basic material plugged in here for metallic, right? That's the constant, right click, constant, and a constant one vector, right? And I created another constant for the roughness, and this one is set to 0.5, so the palm fronds are a little bit shiny. I also have my opacity here, which I've plugged in directly into the opacity mask. And then I have this multiply, and I'm multiplying another constant by that and plugging that into opacity here. All right? This is going to help with the overall translucency that happens. Now you'll notice I'm using another multiply, and I have this guy that has color. In order to get that to happen, you just right click and do constant 3 vector, right? And then that allows you to come over here to the side and click, and you can change color values there. Now, what that's doing with the one I've set up here is this gets multiplied together, and that goes to this area. That goes into this portion called subsurface color. Now, what that does, I'm going to say no, is when you have the sun up there and you move your tree over, instead of it just being black, you actually get a little bit of color that shows up, right? And so that's what that subsurface is happening. It's sort of the effect, the easy way to describe this is if you ever put a flashlight on your palm and looked at it, or if you ever put a kind of flashlight in your mouth like kids do and you can kind of see the blood vessels and stuff through it. This is the material creating that kind of effect, and so you sort of see this kind of nice green glow happening there on the trees. All right, and so that's how you go through and you create your materials and you bring in your models and assign your materials appropriately to them. And that's the process for going through and building a palm tree.